Kia ora, everybody, and welcome as we continue our journey through 75 years of Age Concern in Auckland. And today I'm very honoured to welcome Janferie Bryce Chapman to join us for the conversation to share her stories. Janferie was the first person who I ever turned to when I joined the team here at Age Concern Auckland almost 10 years ago. So Janferie, welcome and thank you for coming in.
Thank you, Kevin, and it's a privilege and an honour to be part of the 75th Jubilee. That's quite exciting, isn't it?
It's very exciting.
Yeah.
But tell me, Janferie, when did you start your journey with Age Concern?
I started with Age Concern on the North Shore in 1990. I was at a school camp and the job was advertised in the paper, and I thought that interests me. It was part-time work and I still had children at home. So I came along for an interview, and when I got back to the school camp, all the kids said to me, "Did you get the job, Mrs. Chapman? Did you get the job?" But yeah, so it suited me. It was part-time, it was close to home. I had not worked with older people before, but I had worked in confidential services.
Right.
And I had worked in social services. So it was an interesting journey. So when I started, there was just me. I was the first executive officer. Prior to that, it had been run by the committee and by a secretary treasurer who I think had a small pay, and he worked part-time, Mr. Russell. He was a retired engineer. His wife, who was on the committee, was the deputy mayor for Takapuna. And there was some other, and Franklin was a social worker at the hospital. She was on the committee. And Pat Webb was a retired school inspector. Very genteel, very kind, very welfare orientated people. And they had done good works over the years. So I followed on very good systems and the shoulders of some very good work. They hadn't realised that at the end of that year it was their 25th year. So I started in Age Concern North Shore's 25th year.
Oh, so you started with the Jubilee?
Yes.
Whilst we're celebrating ours. And so how long were you there in your role at North Shore?
I was there just under 30 years.
And so it means, I understand as well that some of the services we run today, like our visiting service, we have you to blame for that.
Yes, we had the opportunity for setting up a visiting service. We were part of a pilot where the Ministry of Health, I think, reached out to see if there was a need. So I went and visited several rest homes. It was based as a rest home service in those days.
Right.
And yes, they said that they would support it. So I added to my part-time hours and became a full-time worker, and 20 of my hours then became running and coordinating the visiting service. We recruited volunteers and trained them, and as that developed and as I got better at funding applications, I could replace my 20 hours because the work was getting heavier for as a CEO, and employ someone else. So then we had another staff member who was helping to do that, and somewhere in the meantime I also managed to get an administration support to mind the office so I could get out and about.
So you must be immensely proud that 30 years later that service not only is still running here in Auckland but is now across the whole of New Zealand.
Yes, it was very valuable. It moved out of the rest homes obviously and became a home visiting service, and now I think it's a mixture because people transit into rest homes and can still be lonely. Some wonderful friendships, absolutely wonderful. Even since I've left, some of the volunteers that I know are still visiting older people, and they have been for a number of years, and built really good bonds with them. And it gave us a relationship with the rest homes. So the visiting service was the first service, and then the elder abuse service came along next, and that was being mooted as there was some research, and I can't remember who did the research now, several bits of research overseas and in New Zealand that identified it as an issue. So I hosted a big meeting of every provider for older people that I could think of, you know, the rest homes in the area, the district health board, the social workers, churches, and we had a meeting and we had a presentation about what elder abuse was. Oh, there were lawyers there as well, and just talked about how we would run it, you know, how could we intervene, set up an intervention. And so I then used my person that had been my ABS coordinator, had transited into being a field officer, and she was my first elder abuse coordinator, Sue Clark her name was. She had a nursing background and had worked in rest homes, and she was my first. But we set up a support network, so we had an elder abuse resource team.
Right.
And they used to meet every month, and we would discuss cases there. So we had a lawyer, we had police, we had I think rest home people and social workers from what's now DHB, I think, who would come once a month, and they also agreed to, if she picked up the phone and wanted some, you know, police input or legal input on that, she could do that just to support her, because there was no training. You know, it was just, and she wasn't trained as a social worker, she was trained as a nurse, but had huge heart and huge empathy for older people. And I remember one case years later where we got a lot of pro bono support, probably $60,000 worth of pro bono legal support for a case that went on for 3 years with a very litigious family member.
Well, we're still trying to, even today, argue with government to provide some legal funding so we can actually help